Jackie.
Were you good friends?
Yes, yes, we were good friends. And here's I am with Bobby Kennedy on during the Indiana primary. There I am, and there's Bobby shaking hands. There. This is me with President Kennedy. If he has Kissinger's book on his desk, The Necessity for Choice. There.
This one?
And that's me and Jackie going out on a date.
Did you date Jackie?
After he was killed.
I've read that President Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, was very interested in the world of espionage and Ian Fleming. I'm just wondering if that was true, if you ever...
Oh yeah, he was a big fan of Ian Fleming. He made Ian Fleming. And after he got elected president, he told how he read the Ian Fleming books, and that's how he really took off in this country because of that. You know, so it was his liking for Ian Fleming, which not many people had ever heard of. But suddenly made all those books big bestsellers. So he did like it, and he did. Although he got pretty disillusioned by the Bay of Pigs with his own espionage operation, and ended up firing the legendary head of it, Alan Dulles, as you know, and. So that but he did have an interest. Well, everybody had an interest. Everybody still has an interest. They're making a number 20 Bond film over there. You do.
Why do you think he was so? What did he like so much about James Bond?
Well, I guess what everybody liked. You know, I mean, I think maybe he saw himself as James Bond. Kind of, he had that the physical courage, the suavity, the daring do. I mean, what we all like about old James Bond.
I know there were a lot of ideas about how to assassinate Fidel Castro, and that being one way of dealing with the Cuba problem. And I'm just wondering if you ever heard any rumors about that at the time, if that was something you were aware of.
Well, yeah, no, I know now that, of course, that they began that under Eisenhower. They even contracted with the mafia to do part of it. Kennedy always, I knew there were members of the Kennedy administration that thought killing Castro was the way to solve the problem. Although that was absurd too, because who would have taken over then? Che Guevara or his brother? And I've heard at least somebody as high as the Secretary of Defense recommend that we should take executive action. You know, executive action turns out to be a euphemism for assassination. But never from Kennedy himself. And I remember the only time explicitly we met with a New York Times reporter. I brought him in to see Kennedy. Kennedy was thinking of offering him some kind of job in the administration. And he said, a lot of people after me to putting pressure on me to see if I could try to assassinate Castro. And he said, I can't do that. He said, if I did that, he says, we're all targets. He said, presciently. And we left. But since then, it occurred to me that if Kennedy was in fact involved in anything, he hardly would have mentioned it to a New York Times reporter, because if it ever worked, this guy would end up with the biggest story in America. So that's the only direct evidence I have.
When I was leaving the White House and had a farewell visit with the president in the Oval Office, and I gave him some sketches that a gentleman had asked me to give to him, a Cuban American who lives in Florida. And so I thought this would be a good opportunity to give the president the sketches, and this is one of him, and there was another one of his father, and then the president looked at it and he thought it was a sufficiently good likeness that he picked it up and put it in front of his face. The president was very nice. in a letter that he wrote to me, he thanked me for my work and for my friendship, and I value that very much. I'd like to think that I'm his friend. I mean, he certainly always treated me like a friend, not just an employee. And he's just a very easy person to get to know. When he needs to, he can be very strong, very blunt, very forceful. But when he is able to, he lets down his guard and he jokes and he laughs, and we've traveled together, we've had meals together, and I'm not saying that I would go in there and whenever I wanted to, but when we were together he was always extremely friendly and just a very down-to-earth person. Well, regicide, or the assassination of the king, is something that has existed in history long before the 20th century. And it is, I believe, probably morally justifiable. I believe certainly that not only the 6 million people that died in the concentration camps under the indirect orders of Hitler. There was never a direct order, interestingly enough. Certainly, if you were to take a poll in the world and say, would it have been better to have eliminated this one maniac before he killed those people, I think most people would say yes, that's justifiable. But it isn't just the 6 million people. I mean, 44 million people died in World War II as a result of the Nazi and the Japanese aggressions. And I believe that if someone like Castro, who is responsible for the deaths, directly for the deaths of about 18,000 people in Cuba, and tens of thousands in Africa, Central America, South America, the Middle East, if you were to ask their relatives, would you prefer for a Fidel Castro to have disappeared, maybe taken prisoner, as he was taken prisoner by Batista, but instead of being let out after 2 years, if he had just stayed in jail for 20, 30 years, as he had been condemned to stay, I think that the world would have been a better place.
So you would support the assassination of someone like Fidel Castro?
Well, we're talking hypothetically here, and you started with the example of Adolf Hitler. I certainly can support, I have two grandparents who were killed in the Holocaust, and I certainly would have supported the assassination of Adolf Hitler prior to the beginning of the Second World War. And I think, that any person who is capable of ordering the deaths of innocent people simply because they disagree with their religion or political philosophy has to be taken out of circulation. How that takes place is up to the law. I believe in law, but there are, as the Jesuits say, there are greater goods and lesser evils, and a lesser evil than the death of 6 million people may very well have been the death of one person.
I know it's a tough question. I think it's important, I think. Is Fidel, in your view, a supporter of international terrorism?
Oh, there's no question. He set up camps all over Cuba. I personally have talked to people, to Salvadorians, to Cubans, to Argentines, to others who have been trained in Cuban terrorist camps. And when I say terrorist camps, I mean camps where they learned assassination techniques, explosives, how to set off bombs, rob banks, run drugs, to support their wars of national liberation, as Castro calls them. There is absolutely no question that Fidel Castro has been a terrorist and a supporter of international terrorism. Similar to
Al-Qaeda?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm not an expert on Al-Qaeda. Somebody could say no because he never flew airplanes into the World Trade Towers, but he has ordered the deaths of people in the United States. Once again, I have talked to defectors from Castro's intelligence services who had given me names of people who Castro has ordered killed in the United States and in Chile and in Argentina and in Spain and in other countries. So, does he cross borders to commit acts of terrorism like Al-Qaeda? Yes, he does. So in that respect, he is similar. He's not an Islamic fundamentalist like Al-Qaeda. There are similarities and differences.